The great hall of Jarl Ragnar the Old Wolf had never been so silent. 50 warriors stood in tight ranks, their breath fogging the cold air, their hands resting on axe handles and sword hilts, as if they expected the enemy to burst through the doors at any moment. Torches flickered in iron sconces, casting dancing shadows across the faces of men who had killed together, bled together, buried their dead together. But the enemy was not outside. The enemy was among them, standing in the center of the hall with his wrists bound and his head bowed. He was a young man of perhaps 22, with dark hair that hung across his face, and clothes still wet from the river he had been dragged through. His name was Kale. He was a healer. And his crime was having saved the life of a child whose father had once killed 3 of Ragnar's best warriors in a raid that had left scars on both clans that would never fully heal. "This man is not our enemy," Ragnar said, his voice rasping from the old wound in his throat that had never fully healed, a wound that had taken his voice from a roar to a whisper but had not taken his authority. He sat on his throne, a massive chair carved from the skull of a whale, its armrests worn smooth by decades of use. His body was frail now, his shoulders hunched, his hands trembling, but his eyes were still sharp, still cold, still capable of making warriors tremble. "He is a healer. He saved the son of Jarl Ivar, because that is what healers do. They do not ask about tribes or blood feuds or whose axe spilled whose blood. They see a dying child, and they save them. That is their oath. That is their purpose." He leaned forward, his knuckles white on the arms of his throne, and his voice dropped to a low, dangerous growl. "He will not be harmed. He will be given a room in my quarters. He will eat at my table. He will be protected by every man in this hall. That is my command. That is my final command as your Jarl." The silence that followed was not the silence of agreement. It was the silence of barely contained fury, of men who had been pushed too far and were trying not to snap. Hands tightened on weapons. Eyes hardened, teeth ground together. Bjorn the young wolf, Ragnar's son, stepped forward from the ranks. He was 28 years old, broad-shouldered and handsome, with his father's sharp jaw and his mother's pale, piercing eyes. But where Ragnar's eyes held the wariness of age and regret, Bjorn's held the hunger of ambition and the fire of youth. He had been waiting for his father to step aside for years, and he was tired of waiting. "Father," Bjorn said, his voice measured but tight, each word carefully chosen. "You are asking us to protect an enemy, a southerner, a man who has no loyalty to us, no value to us, no reason to stay. You are asking us to risk our lives, our honor, our clan, our future, for a healer who would just as easily save the life of the man who kills us tomorrow. He would stitch up the wounds of the man who murders your children. He would brew tea for the man who burns our homes." He turned to face the other warriors, gesturing with his hand, his voice rising. "I say we kill him now. Quick, clean. One stroke and this madness ends. We do not need his healing. We have survived for generations without him. We will survive for generations after he is gone." A murmur of agreement rippled through the ranks, low, guttural, dangerous. Weapons shifted, feet shuffled, the air grew thick with tension. Ragnar rose from his throne, and the hall went silent again. He stood with difficulty, leaning on his walking stick, his old bones creaking, his breath coming in shallow gasps. But when he spoke, his voice carried through the hall like a blade through silk. "I have led this clan for 30 years, Ragnar said. "I have bled for you. I have killed for you. I have buried 3 sons for you, all except one." His gaze fell on Bjorn, and something flickered in his eyes. Pain, disappointment, a father's grief for a son he no longer recognized. "I am asking you to trust me. Just this once. Trust that I know what I am doing. Trust that this man is worth more alive than dead. Trust that an old man who has made many mistakes might be trying, at the end of his life, to make one thing right." Bjorn's jaw tightened, his fists clenched. He looked at his father, frail, trembling, dying, and something in his expression flickered. For a moment he looked like the boy he had once been, the boy who had followed his father into battle with a wooden sword and eyes full of stars. Then the moment passed. "You are old," Bjorn said, his voice cold. "You are weak. You have forgotten what it means to be a warrior. You have forgotten what it means to lead. And I will not follow a leader who puts a stranger above his own blood, above his own clan, above the men who have sacrificed everything for him. He turned and strode toward the doors, his boots echoing on the stone floor like hammer blows. Half the warriors followed him, men who had fought beside him, bled beside him, trusted him with their lives. They filed out of the hall in silence, their faces hard, their hands on their weapons. The other half stayed, looking at Ragnar with uncertainty and fear, and a desperate hope that the old Jarl still knew what he was doing. The warband was divided, and in the center of it all, Cale lifted his head and looked at the old Jarl who had saved his life. His wrists were raw from the ropes. His face was bruised from the beating he had taken during his capture. But his eyes were calm, almost peaceful, as if he had already accepted whatever fate awaited him. "You should have let them kill me," Cale said, his voice soft but steady. "It would have been easier for everyone. You would still have your son. Your clan would still be united. I am just one man. I am not worth this." Ragnar shook his head slowly, a sad smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Easier, perhaps," he said, "but not right. I have spent 30 years doing what was easy. I have killed innocent people. I have burned villages. I have started wars for land and gold and pride. I have done terrible things, Cale, things that keep me awake at night, things that will follow me into the afterlife." He gestured to one of the guards, a young man named Eric, who had been standing at the back of the hall with his arms crossed and his expression unreadable. "Take him to the east room. Give him food, water, clean clothes. He is not to be harmed. If anyone tries to harm him, you stop them, by any means necessary." Eric nodded, his face blank, his eyes unreadable. He took Cale by the arm, gently, almost carefully, and led him out of the hole. As they walked through the corridors, past the staring warriors and the whispering servants and the children who peeked out from behind doorways, Cale looked at Eric's profile, the strong jaw, the dark eyes that seemed to hold 1,000 secrets, the set of his mouth that was neither cruel nor kind, but somewhere in between. "You are one of them," Cale said quietly, "one of Bjorn's men. I saw you standing behind him. I saw the way you looked at me when I was brought in. You wanted to kill me too, didn't you?" Eric did not look at him. His voice was flat, emotionless. "I am a god. I follow orders. That is all." "Whose orders?" Cale asked. "Your father's, or your Jarl's, or Bjorn's? Which one do you follow when they give different orders? How do you choose?" Eric stopped walking. He turned to face Cale, and for the first time, Cale saw something in his eyes. Not hatred, not cruelty, but confusion. Deep, painful confusion. The look of a man who had built his life on a foundation that was suddenly crumbling beneath his feet. "I do not know," Eric admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "Not anymore. I thought I knew. I thought I had it all figured out. I thought Bjorn was my future. But now," he shook his head, his jaw tightening, "now I do not know anything." He continued walking, and Cale followed, and neither of them spoke again. But something had shifted between them, something small and fragile and unnameable. The first night, Eric stood guard outside Cale's door. He had been given strict orders, not from Bjorn, who had stormed off to his own quarters with his followers, but from Siv, the old female warrior who had been Ragnar's second-in-command for 20 years. Siv was a legend in the clan, a woman who had killed more men than most warriors had ever fought, who had lost an eye and 2 fingers and still refused to retire. She was loyal to Ragnar, utterly and completely, and she would die before she saw his final wish dishonored. "Watch him," Siv had said, her one good eye boring into Eric's. "Watch him, and do not let anyone near him. If Bjorn sends men, you stop them, by any means necessary. Do you understand me, boy?" Eric had nodded, but he did not know if he could do it. He had followed Bjorn for 5 years, ever since Bjorn had pulled him from a burning village and given him a sword and a purpose. Bjorn was not just his leader. Bjorn was his savior, his mentor, the closest thing to family he had ever known. Bjorn had taught him to fight, to kill, to survive. Bjorn had given him a reason to wake up in the morning when all he had wanted to do was die. And now Bjorn wanted him to hate a healer who had done nothing wrong. Eric did not know what to do. He did not know who he was anymore. So he stood guard and he listened to the silence, and he tried not to think about the young man on the other side of the door. Around midnight he heard a sound, not a cry, not a sob, but something softer, a breath, a sigh, the rustle of fabric, and then a voice, soft and calm, like water flowing over stones. "You are still there." Cale said through the door, "I can hear you breathing. I can hear your heart beating. You are nervous. Why are you nervous?" Eric did not answer. He pressed his back against the wall and stared at the ceiling, counting the cracks in the stone. "I am not going to run," Cale continued after a moment. "I have nowhere to run to. My village is gone. My family is dead. My people scattered to the winds like ash from a fire. I've been running for 5 years, across rivers, through forests, over mountains. I've slept in ditches and eaten bark and watched men die in my arms, and I'm tired of it. I am so tired, Eric." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was quieter, softer, almost a whisper. "Do you know what it is like to be tired? Not just in your body, but in your soul. To wake up every morning and wish you had not. To open your eyes and feel nothing but the weight of another day." Eric's throat tightened. His eyes burned. He knew. He had felt that way after the fire, after watching his mother burn alive, after holding his sister's hand while she coughed blood onto his shirt and called out for a mother who was already dead. He had felt that way for months, for years, until Bjorn had found him and given him a sword and a reason to live. "I am sorry," Eric said. The words came out before he could stop them, rough and broken and raw. Cale was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "Thank you. No one has said that to me in a long time. No one has apologized for anything. They just take and take and take, and they never look back." They did not speak again that night. But when dawn came, gray and cold, painting the corridor in shades of silver, Eric was still there, and something had shifted between them, something small and fragile and unnameable, something that felt like the beginning of trust. The days that followed were a slow, painful unraveling. Bjorn and his followers refused to enter the great hall while Cale was there. They took their meals in the courtyard, huddled around fires that did little to keep out the cold. They held their councils in the stables, surrounded by the smell of hay and horse sweat. They took their orders from Bjorn instead of Ragnar, and Bjorn's orders were clear: prepare for war. The warband was fractured, and everyone could feel it. The tension in the air, the whispered conversations that stopped when someone approached, the glances that lingered too long on weapon hilts. Men who had fought beside each other for years now looked at each other with suspicion. Friends became enemies. Brothers became strangers. Eric moved between the two worlds, serving Bjorn during the day and guarding Cale at night. He did not know which side he belonged to. He did not know if he belonged to any side at all. He felt like a ghost, drifting through a world that no longer made sense. On the third night, Bjorn sent men to kill Cale. Eric heard them coming, the soft footsteps in the corridor, the whisper of drawn blades, the low murmur of voices he recognized. These were men he had trained with, fought with, bled with. These were his brothers. And they had come to murder a healer in his sleep. Eric stepped in front of the door and drew his sword. The blade caught the torchlight, glinting like a promise. "He is under the Jarl's protection," Eric said, his voice steady despite the pounding of his heart. "Leave now, or I will kill you." The men hesitated. They knew Eric. They had fought beside him, bled beside him, trusted him with their lives. They had seen him weep over fallen comrades, had seen him charge into battle without fear, had seen him hold a dying man's hand and whisper words of comfort. They knew what kind of man he was, and they knew that he meant what he said. "You are making a mistake," one of them said, a grizzled veteran named Aron who had a scar across his face and a missing ear. "Bjorn will not forget this. He will not forgive this. You are throwing away everything for a stranger." "Then let him remember," Eric said, his voice cold, "that I chose what was right over what was easy, that I chose a healer over a killer, that I chose a man who saves lives over a man who takes them." The men stared at him for a long moment. Then slowly, they lowered their weapons and backed away. They disappeared into the shadows, their footsteps fading into silence. Eric stood in the corridor for a long time, his sword still drawn, his hands shaking, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Then he heard Cale's voice through the door, soft and full of wonder. "You did not have to do that. You could have let them kill me. No one would have blamed you. You could have walked away and pretended you never heard them coming." Eric sheathed his sword and leaned his forehead against the rough wood of the door. His eyes were closed. His heart was pounding. "Yes, they would have," he said, his voice cracking. I would have blamed me. I would have blamed myself for the rest of my life. I would have seen your face every time I closed my eyes. I would have heard your voice in every silence. He opened the door. Cale was sitting on the edge of the bed, his face pale in the torchlight, his dark hair falling across his forehead. He looked tired and thin and impossibly young. But his eyes were old. They had seen too much death, too much pain, too much loss. They held the weight of 1,000 sorrows, but they also held something else, something that looked like hope. "Why are you protecting me?" Cale asked. "I am no one to you. I am a stranger, a southerner, an enemy. I am the reason your warband is divided. I am the reason your brothers are fighting each other. I am not worth this. I am not worth any of this." Eric crossed the room and sat on the bed beside him. The mattress sagged under his weight, and their shoulders touched. He could feel the warmth of Cale's body through their clothes, and it steadied him in a way he could not explain. "Because you are not an enemy," Eric said. "Because you saved a child when you did not have to. Because you have been running for 5 years, and you are still kind. Because every night when I stand outside your door, I hear you breathe, and I think that the world would be darker without that sound." He paused, his throat tightening. "Because you look at me like I am a person, not a weapon. Because you ask me questions and wait for my answers. Because you said thank you when no one else bothered." Cale's eyes glistened. A single tear slipped down his cheek, tracing a path through the dirt and the bruises. "You do not know me," he whispered. "You do not know the things I have done, the people I have failed to save, the hands I have held as they went cold." "Then let me know you," Eric said. And Cale did. He talked through the night, his voice soft and steady, and Eric listened. He talked about his childhood in the southern valleys, his father the healer who had taught him to read the language of herbs, his mother the weaver who had died in childbirth. He talked about the raid that had destroyed his village, the fire that had consumed his home, the faces of the people he had watched die, one by one, by one by one. He talked about the child he had saved, a little girl with red hair and a gap-toothed smile, and how her father, Yalivar, had thanked him by selling him to Ragnar's warband as a slave. "I do not regret saving her," Cale said, his voice fierce despite his exhaustion. "Even knowing what it would cost me, even knowing that I would lose everything. She was innocent. She was just a child. She deserved to live." Eric reached out and took Cale's hand. It was small and warm and calloused from years of grinding herbs and mixing salves. He could feel the pulse in Cale's wrist, steady and strong, a reminder that life continued even when everything else fell apart. "You deserve to live too," Eric said. Cale looked at their joined hands, then at Eric's face. His eyes were wide, searching, as if he were trying to memorize every line and shadow. "Why are you being kind to me?" he asked again, but this time the question was different. This time it was not about protection or duty. This time it was about something deeper. "Because I think I am falling in love with you," Eric said. The words hung in the air between them, fragile as glass, precious as gold. Cale did not pull away. He did not laugh or scoff or tell Eric he was crazy. He just looked at him as if he was seeing him for the first time, and said, "I think I am falling in love with you too." Eric kissed him. It was clumsy and desperate and tasted of tears from both of them. Their noses bumped, their teeth clashed. It was not a perfect kiss. But it was honest. It was real. It was the first true thing Eric had done in years. When they finally broke apart, Cale was smiling, a real smile, warm and bright, the first one Eric had seen. It transformed his face, made him look young and hopeful and impossibly beautiful. "What happens now?" Cale asked. "Now," Eric said, "we survive, together, no matter what comes, no matter who stands against us. We survive." But surviving was not easy. On the 10th day, Ragnar's health failed. The old Jarl had been sick for months, a cough that would not stop, a fever that came and went, a weakness in his limbs that made it hard to stand. He had hidden it well, had continued to lead, had refused to show weakness in front of his enemies. But now, with the warband divided and his son plotting against him, the sickness finally caught up. He collapsed in the great hole, clutching his chest, his face pale, his breath coming in ragged gasps. His walking stick clattered to the floor. His eyes rolled back. Siv caught him before he fell, lowering him gently to the ground, and then she shouted for Cale. "Heal him," she commanded, a voice sharp with fear. "You are a healer. Heal him. He is the only thing holding this clan together. If he dies, everything falls apart." Kale knelt beside Ragnar, his hands moving over the old man's chest, feeling for the source of the pain. His face was grim, his eyes focused. He pressed his ear to Ragnar's heart, listening to the rhythm, counting the beats. Then he sat back, his expression heavy. "His heart is failing," Kale said. "It is old, it is tired, it has been damaged by years of battle and stress. I can ease his pain. I can give him a few more weeks, perhaps a few more months. But I cannot save him. No one can." Bjorn burst into the hole, his sword drawn, his followers at his back. His face was red with fury, his eyes wild. He pointed his blade at Kale, his voice shaking with rage. "You see?" he shouted. "He cannot even save my father. He is useless. A fraud, a waste of food and space. I should have killed him the moment he arrived. I should have slit his throat and thrown his body in the river." He stepped toward Kale, his blade raised. Eric stepped between them. He did not have his sword. He had left it in his quarters, not wanting to provoke a fight. But he had his body, and he used it to shield Kale from Bjorn's rage. His arms were spread wide. His eyes were closed. He waited for the impact. "Do not touch him," Eric said. "Move aside," Bjorn growled. "You are one of my men. You follow my orders. You owe me your life. I pulled you from the fire. I gave you a sword. I made you who you are." "Not anymore," Eric said. "You gave me a reason to fight. Kale gave me a reason to live." Bjorn lunged. The blade came down, and Eric did not move. He stood firm, his arms spread, his eyes closed, waiting for the end. But the end did not come. Sif had caught Bjorn's arm mid-swing, a gnarled hand gripping his wrist with surprising strength. She twisted, and the sword clattered to the floor. Then she stepped between Bjorn and Eric, her one good eye blazing. "Enough," she said, her voice cold as winter iron. "You have forgotten yourself, Bjorn. Your father is dying, and you are trying to kill a healer. This is not honor. This is not leadership. This is madness." Bjorn wrenched his arm free, but he did not swing again. He looked at his father, pale and gasping on the floor, at Kale, kneeling beside him, still trying to ease his pain, at Eric, standing between them with tears on his face, and something in his eyes flickered. Doubt, shame, grief, all of it, tangled together. "Leave," Bjorn said finally, his voice hoarse, broken. "All of you, leave me with my father. I need to say goodbye." Sif gestured to the others, and they filed out of the hole, leaving Bjorn alone with Ragnar. Eric took Kale's hand and led him to their room, the East Room, the one that had been Kale's prison and had become their sanctuary. They sat on the bed, holding each other, listening to the distant sound of Bjorn's sobs echoing through the great hall. "He loved his father," Kale said softly. "He does," Eric agreed. "He just forgot how to show it. He forgot that love is not weakness. He forgot that the strongest thing a man can do is care for someone else." Ragnar died 3 days later. Bjorn stood at his funeral pyre, his face blank, his eyes red, his hands clenched at his sides. He did not speak. He did not weep. He simply watched as the flames consumed the body of the man who had given him life. The fire crackled and popped, the smoke rose into the gray sky. And when the pyre had burned to ash, Bjorn came to Kale and Eric. He stood before them, his shoulders slumped, his sword at his side, his face pale and hollow. "I wanted to kill you," he said to Kale. "I hated you. I blamed you for my father's weakness, for the division of the Warband, for everything that went wrong. I thought that if I could just get rid of you, everything would go back to the way it was." He looked at Eric, and his voice cracked. "I was wrong. My father was not weak. He was brave. Braver than me. He saw something in you, in both of you, that I could not see. He saw that love is not weakness. It is the only strength that matters. He saw that protecting someone is harder than killing someone. He saw that healing is just as important as fighting." He turned and walked away, his footsteps heavy on the stone floor. Eric watched him go, feeling something like pity. "What happens now?" Kale asked. "Now," Eric said, "we rebuild. We build something better than what came before. Something my father-in-law would have wanted." Siv became the new Jarl, chosen by the Warband for her wisdom and her strength and her unwavering loyalty to what was right. Bjorn was exiled, sent north to live among a clan that did not know his name or his shame, given a chance to start over and become a better man. And Kale became the Warband's official healer, the one they turned to when they were wounded and sick and afraid. He was no longer a prisoner. He was no longer a stranger. He was family. Eric stood beside him through all of it. At the sick beds, comforting the dying. At the council meetings, advising Siv on matters of strategy. At the long nights when the ghosts of the past came calling, whispering doubts and fears. He held Kale's hand when the memories got too heavy. He kissed Kale's forehead when the nightmares woke him screaming. He loved Kale with every broken piece of his heart, and Kale loved him back. "Do you ever regret it?" Kale asked one night as they lay together in the east room, the fire crackling in the hearth, the wind howling outside the window. The room was warm and quiet, filled with the scent of wood smoke and the soft rhythm of their breathing. "Leaving Beyond's side? Choosing me over everything you knew? Throwing away your future for a healer who had nothing to offer you?" Eric turned to look at him, at his dark hair spread across the pillow, his tired eyes that still held so much kindness, his gentle mouth that had spoken so many words of comfort to so many dying souls. "I regret nothing," he said. "I regret the years I spent following a man who taught me to hate. I regret the battles I fought for the wrong reasons. I regret the people I killed without asking why. But I do not regret you. I have never regretted you, not for a single moment." Kale smiled, that smile that still made Eric's heart skip even after all this time. "I love you," Kale said. "I love you, Eric. You saved my life. Not just when you stood in front of Bjorn's blade. Every day. Every night. Every time you held my hand and told me I was not alone. Every time you listened to my stories and asked me questions. Every time you looked at me like I was worth something." Eric pulled him close and kissed him, soft and slow and full of promise. The kiss deepened, and the world outside faded away. The wars, the divisions, the ghosts of the past. There was only this. Only them. Only love. "And I love you," Eric said when they finally broke apart. "You showed me that there is more to life than fighting and killing. You showed me that healing is just as brave as war. You showed me that love is worth any price. You showed me that I was worth loving." They fell asleep in each other's arms, and the fire burned low, and the wind died down, and the war that had divided them became a distant memory. The Warband was no longer divided. It was stronger than before, not because they had found a new enemy to fight, but because they had learned to protect instead of destroy, to heal instead of harm, to love instead of hate. And at the center of it all, holding the pieces together, was a healer who had asked for nothing and a God who had given everything. They had started as captor and captive, enemy and enemy, stranger and stranger. They had become something more. They had become home. And that, Eric knew, was the greatest victory of all.